So welcome to our session on creating a custom portal for Tableau server. My name is Jared Dominguez. I'm a technical writer at Tableau. I write for the developer APIs, so if you've ever used the APIs, read some of the online help, you've probably read something that I wrote. This is my co-presenter.
Hi, I'm Wes Shees. I work in professional services and solution architect, so I go from customer to customer each week and build a lot of portals and work with the APIs and extensibility, so do this stuff all the time.
Yeah, awesome. So let's dive right in. What do we mean when we say a portal? We really just mean anything that is a central place, a convenient place where you can get information about Tableau. So a lot of people use SharePoint or they use wikis to try and embed content to put everything that they want their organization to know about Tableau in one place. Of course, this is a talk in the developer track, so we're going to make a web application instead. We'll be looking at a lot of code, but before we do that, let's just go through a demo. So as I switch over, and as I log in, you're probably thinking, this looks suspiciously bootstrappy. So this entire thing is a sample that we put together specifically for the purpose of this talk. The sample is all up on GitHub. There's also a link at the end if you want to download it. So looking at this page, there are a few things you might notice. First of all, there's some branding at the top. There's a menu. There's some links here, and there's some resources. So a lot of companies like to have their own branding on their portal. They want it to look and feel like the rest of their website. They want people to feel at home and to kind of minimize the learning curve into getting into Tableau. The other thing is you notice these menus kind of match this list here, which isn't particularly interesting in itself, except for these are being generated dynamically from the REST API. So we make a query to the REST API, and we get a list of workbooks that match a particular tag. So once you have this sample up and running, the only thing that you have to do to change the menu structure, to change the workbooks that show up that you want to highlight for all of your users, is add a tag to the workbooks you want in Tableau. So we're not very creative, so we just called it portal, but you could call the tag anything you wanted. Down here, you notice there's a little list of resources, so including the link to GitHub and some links to documentation. Of course, if this was a portal that you put together, you'd probably have information about how your company uses Tableau, about where to get information, who to contact. We find that that's one of the things that becomes a big barrier for people is they want to have more content about how they use Tableau right next to their viz. So with that, let's go ahead and click one of these buttons. So we're here on this new page, and it looks like a viz just loaded. There's no toolbar. There aren't any tabs. So what we've done is we've embedded it with the JavaScript API so that it fits as seamlessly as possible into it without the Tableau Chrome. A lot of people like to have it really integrate as deeply as possible into their applications. So that's one of the nice things that you can do. You also notice that there's this export button here. Because we've hidden the toolbar, we find that a lot of people want to create a custom toolbar so that they can have some of the functionality or additional functionality to what you can do with Tableau, and in a way that maps really well with their design. So for example, if you click export here, that just uses the JavaScript API, and it makes this call to export a PDF. So we can download that, and the PDF got generated, and we downloaded it. Awesome. So a couple more things that aren't as intuitive on this page. You'll notice that there's this report ID. So when we generated that list of workbooks, we actually got a lot of information back from Tableau. We got the owner name, we got the report ID, we got a whole bunch of stuff back. And using this string is how we can tell this report view page to display this particular workbook. So one other thing that you won't really notice here is that the REST API is kind of a sticking point. The REST API and the JavaScript API don't actually share an authenticated session. So if you want to embed vizzes in a web application, you have to use trusted tickets, or you have to find another means of authenticating your users. So Wes will talk a little bit more about that, but briefly, trusted tickets are just a way of whitelisting your server, whitelisting your web application server from Tableau server and saying to accept the requests from it and allow it to display vizzes in an authenticated way. OK, so let's switch back to our slides. So after that, a few of you are probably still thinking, why would I want to build something like that? So one of the main reasons why you would want to build a portal are discoverability. So that image that you see there is a real example from the development org. We have 20,000 different views, and this is just development. This isn't all of Tableau. So even though Tableau really tries to make it easy for you to discover your content through search, through favoriting, through projects, sometimes people want to just have one way where they can highlight, where they can feature something that they want everybody to see. So think of a sales organization that wants to have just commission and just monthly and just quarterly stuff right at the top for everyone to look at all the time. This is where something like that really shines, having featured workbooks. So another main reason why we see people create portals is to have a custom layout, a custom organization. So a lot of times people want to have a navigation structure that, for example, maps to the way that their organization is laid out. So you have a hierarchy in your organization, and the way that people think is in that hierarchy. So that's how they get to their content, instead of trying to navigate through a project structure. And also, like we showed before, you can add resources. So this example is actually from a blog post, an excellent blog post that we'll link you to at the end. But it has a lot of resources and news and things that are important to our organization. OK, so the last reason that I'll go into is wanting more control. So if you're a developer, if you're in this session, chances are that you want pixel perfect control. You want to be able to completely own the experience that your users have. You want to do more than just what comes out of the box. So if you want to add branding, if you want to add more custom interactions, a portal is the way to do that. So some quick use cases for portals. A department-specific portal. So for example, if you have HR, you don't want anybody else looking at this stuff, so you've locked it down in a site, and you just want to feature specific information, you could do that with a portal. Guided analytics. This is something where, for example, marketing wants to create a website for customers, and they want to guide them to the right conclusion. So you would allow them to navigate and drill through a set of workbooks and really get a better understanding of data. The last example that I'll give is an executives portal. So a lot of times executives don't want to learn another tool. They don't want to go through a sea of vizzes. They don't want to spend a lot of time because they're strapped for time. So companies create these portals with a very stripped down, very focused view of the content that their executives need. And since a lot of executives like to use iPads, for example, or iPhones, you could also add in mobile support and then use device-specific dashboards. So these are just some of the main reasons why we've seen people use portals. There are, of course, a lot of other reasons. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to my co-presenter, Wes, and he's going to actually show us some code for building a portal.
All right.
Actually, sorry, I think you have some more slides. That's my fault. There you go.
Thanks, Jared. So Jared's kind of, I think, gone through some of the examples of why you would build a portal and some of the use cases of how to use a portal and why you'd want to have it in your organization. This is normally where I come in. I would engage with customers at this point and start working to actually create that portal for them and help them navigate the path to get there. So the steps I'm going to take you through today is really the logic and the workflow that I usually work with when I work with customers and get these kind of engagements. So a couple of things I just want to point out first. We built this example for simplicity. So it's not really based on a lot of the best practices. I'll highlight some areas where we did things on this portal for simplicity. But there's some things like actually having a database on your portal layer rather than connecting and using the REST API exclusively to power the portal. This is designed with ASP, and you can actually put it on the Tableau server. You can spin up a IIS web server on a different port and then actually install on the same server, but definitely not a best practice. We recommend putting it on its own server. You don't want to use your cores in the things that are dedicated to analytics for powering a portal. We're using JavaScript API for the embedding. For this example, we're trying to give the two-way interactivity. The export PDF example that Jared showed on the demo, that's part of the power of having two-way interactivity. You can also If you just want to basically put something into Salesforce or into a SharePoint, you can use a simple iframe that would put the viz into the portal layer, but it wouldn't allow you to have the communication back and forth. You couldn't click on something in the viz and have that fire an action inside the application. So the JavaScript API gives two-way communication, and definitely we recommend that. We're using ASP. You can really use any language that you want. Part of what we did, we're using a REST wrapper library. Tableau is starting to produce server-client libraries. Right now it's only available in Python. Because we wrote this example in C# for ASP, we landed up using a different library. But if you saw devs on stage, the client libraries can take 300 lines of code to make one call to the REST API, and that can turn it into 3 lines of code. So the savings that you have there, you can call functions like get workbooks by user, rather than having to create an envelope, think about the headers and passing that off to a REST API and then parsing the XML that comes back. So these libraries will definitely accelerate your development. There's really libraries out there on a variety of languages. We used one from Data Painter so that that has a C# base, and we used it in here. So when we start and start an engagement with the customer to help them build a portal, the first thing that we really think about is the end user experience. So we always start out on a friendly whiteboard and just mock up what you're going to build. And we start out thinking about the branding. So you can see the header on the top and the footer on the bottom. They have a logo, some copyright notices, maybe a welcome, maybe an explanation for what people are going to find on this portal, and a menu. So this is a basic way that we start out with something, just kind of designing the top and bottom. And then the center area, where you see the 2 green boxes, is really about components. And you want to think about different components that you can put in there. Featured items and resources are what we put onto this portal. But people will put other content on there as well. The last thing that you're going to consider is your security integration. So if you have a single sign-on experience, you can have like SAML. Or on this example we used is just a basic username and password prompt, and people log in. And we're using Tableau's built-in user security. So those are the high-level steps of what you want to think about. And so here's 6 of the different components that I frequently see in the field. Featured views, the ability for a manager to say, I want these 5 workbooks to be the first thing that everybody sees when they come into the portal. Most popular views is really user-generated content. So who is looking at what, bubbling up the stuff that is most actively used in the company, and just allowing the community to really drive that feature and promote that content. My recent views is really for an individual, just more of like a crumb line. What did I just look at? What did I look at yesterday? And a way to kind of go back through things that you've seen. Favoriting views allows you to sort of tag things, tag reports that you're going to use on a regular basis, and then it culminates them all into one little area. Advanced search is another one that I see a lot of. Tableau's search controls are very robust, but there's many times a UI, UX team has a specific way that they want their search to work. And so people will redesign the search controls to really kind of tailor it to the way that the company wants. Many times the search results themselves are seeded with different priorities based on what they want to promote the content. So search is a big area that I see a lot of customization. And newly published views is just a way to promote new content that was put onto the portal. So if the person is in a discovery mode, they might check out the newly published views every once in a while to find something new that's helpful to them. So the last part that we really think about is security. On this demo, we're using Tableau's local security. So we're actually going to take a username and password. We're going to pass it over to Tableau server through the REST API. And it's going to tell us whether or not this person is valid to actually get onto the server. Once that happens, everything that we're actually pulling as far as the list of workbooks, it's what that user has access to. So the privilege and the permission system that's in Tableau server is going to drive what we get. We can't pull out workbooks that person doesn't have access to, but we're using the security model that's built into Tableau so that we don't need to recreate it. your options, you can use a SAML, like a single sign-on, or Kerberos or Microsoft's single sign-on, or you can just open up public access if you have a core-based license, and you can use like a guest user account as well. So for this one, we use the first option, and we'll jump into the code in just a second. So the last part I want to talk about here, this is a slide from Devs on Stage. We're really, on this example, we're using the third and the fifth option. So JavaScript API, we're going to use that for the interactivity on the viz and actually displaying the viz. And the REST API and a client library is used to pull all the metadata. What workbooks are we looking at? Who owns this workbook? Information like that. So back-end information. So with that, we're going to get ready to jump into some source code here. The source code for this project is all available on GitHub, so you can download it, and we'll walk you through this whole thing and explain how it works. But it really breaks down into three main components. There's the authentication page, which is our index page, and that is really, it's doing the login, and also it's doing the big pull of information from Tableau server. So because we didn't want the portal, every time you load a page, we didn't want to go back to Tableau server and grab all this information again. We grab it when the person logs in, and then we store it all as a session variable. So that from that point on, as long as that session is active, the information's coming locally from the portal. That's where you would really want, if you're doing this for an enterprise or a large organization, that's where you're going to want to put the database layer so that you can actually pull the information, cache it, keep it in that database. For this example, we just basically use session variables. So the next page that you'll land on after you've gone through and gotten all that information is really the greeting and discovery page. So the previous slide that we showed with the header and footer, that's really the greeting and discovery page. It's the navigation, the menu, where we're going to put the components, and it's really the page that just helps people get to the content that they want to. And then when they select one of the items from that greeting and discovery page, they're going to be taken to the report display page, which is going to actually show the report. So it's simple. It's three different main components. A portal can be expanded from here, but these are the main things that we do is help people discover content with the menu and then view it with the report. So with that, I'm going to jump over into Visual Studio. And we're going to start out with this index page. So we're here with index. And this page, basically, it's a very simple page. All it's doing is laying out the design, putting out the username and password prompt. And the only real code in this index page is some conditional logic for an error message. So if we try to authenticate in, and it fails, we're going to pass back a bad user or bad login error message, and it would be displayed on that index page. So the variables that we're pulling in from the form are simply user email and user pass, and then they click a button, which here the login page, which would take them into the menu page. So the next page that we come to is menu, and the top part of the page here is a file in the example called header. And so the header file is designed to really do the main work of actually authenticating the user, grabbing the information, making sure their session is still active, pulling the information from the session if they've already been logged in. So this is the header is really the main area of integration with the REST API. So when the header file is called, the first thing it's going to do is get the username, the user's email, and we're going to pass it to a function called Tableau load profile. We're passing email address and the password straight from the login screen. So we're going to jump into a .cs file here, which allows us to actually write functions, and we'll pull up and see what that Tableau load profile function does. So again, we're passing the username and password, and in this, the first thing we're doing is setting up some variables that determine where the Tableau server is, and ours is on localhost here on this machine. So part of the configuration, if you were to set up this example, would be to change this to wherever your Tableau server is. So with those variables set up, the first thing we're going to do is actually instantiate a Tableau controller. And Tableau controller here is where we're connecting to the server client library. So we're basically passing it the username or the URL of the Tableau server, the username and the password, and we get back a handle that's going to be a TC, which is going to be our Tableau controller. So the first thing that we're going to do is actually attempt to log in. So we have a try-catch condition here, where the first thing we do is we try to log in to the REST client. And this will, when you log into a Tableau server through the REST API, you're going to get back 3 variables if you successfully log in. So you're going to get a my token, which is the token for your session, a site ID, and a user ID. If your login fails, you'll be thrown into the exception handler here, and instead, we're going to set that my token to failed. And so that would be passed back to that previous page that we were just on, and that's where we would handle a failure by sending a message back and saying bad login. So here we're going to assume that we had a good login. We got the token. It's not equal to failed. So we're going to go and get more information about this user. We got back a user ID and a site ID, but we didn't get name of the user. We didn't find out what role they have. So we make another call using that user ID to get user by ID. And that's going to pass back an array list that has the username, the site role, the last time they logged in, and their full name. So now we've got information about who's logged in. So on the example, we can say welcome whoever, and that information is being populated. So now we're going to move on and actually look for workbooks that this user has access to. So the first thing we do is create a data table. And a data table is similar to a database table, but it's a programming element. And so we're going to define it here, of basically what each data column is. So we have ID, the name of the workbook, the project ID, the project name, owner ID, owner name, and default view. When we make a call to the workbook to get workbook information, it's not going to return all of these variables. It's going to return the workbook ID, the name of the workbook, but things like owner name and the default view don't come back from the actual get workbooks call. You have to make a call to the REST API and then make subsequent calls to make sure you get all the information that you want. And it's important, one thing that I definitely want to highlight, we built this example, it was on the 10.0 REST API. Tableau's development team has been coming out with a lot of new features, the ability to actually query, and then we have some new features coming out in the first couple quarters next year where you'll actually be able to specify the fields that you want back. So rather than actually having to call and make subsequent calls and iterate through things, it's getting a lot more robust where you can make one call to the server and it'll be a lot more efficient. So definitely something, we built it based on what's available today, but there's a lot of changes that are coming in the near future. So now that we've defined our workbook data table, we're going to go and use our username and say get workbooks by user. This is going to return a data table that has our workbooks list, and then we're going to count how many rows are in that workbooks list to get a number of how many workbooks we have. So now that we've got that basic list of workbooks, we're going to iterate through with this for each loop and look through this workbooks list and pull out each row and then do some processing for that. So we build some string variables here at the top. And then the first thing we want to do is get workbook tags. So as Jared explained earlier, we use a tag in Tableau Server called portal. You can build whatever you want. You can make it robust. Some people have sales portal. Some people have marketing portal. We're using the tag mechanism so that we don't have to create an admin screen on our portal. We're trying to use any kind of components that are in Tableau Server, and the tagging system is a great way to sort of identify it. It does not exceed the permission system that's in Tableau Server. So if a user doesn't have access to a certain report, but you tag it, it does not give them access to that. We're just taking a list of maybe 100 reports, just to use a round number, And in that 100 reports, there's 5 of them that are tagged, and you can pull featured, you can pull portal, but we're just looking for the ones that have a certain tag and displaying them on the portal. So here, we're taking a workbook ID, and we're going to get all the tags that are on that workbook, and we get back an array list of tags. So the next step here, we set our counter called isTag, it's really an identifier, to 0. And in this for loop, we're going to iterate through this list of tags and check each tag to see if the tag name equals portal. And this is the area where you can build it out and build more robust kind of conditional logic that if this was portal sales, then display it, or this is portal featured, put it into another group. For this one, it's just one-dimensional, so we use the tag portal. And if we find it, we set this isTag to 1, indicating we found it. So then we move down in the code, and our next logic says if this tag was found, if it's greater than 0, we're going to get more information about this workbook. So we got an owner ID. We know who owns this workbook, but we don't know what their name is. So the first thing we'll do here is grab a user ID and pass to get username by ID, and it passes us back the owner name. The next step that we want to do is we now have the basic information that we need about the workbook, the name of the workbook, who owns it, but we don't know the view. When you call of is, you have, in the URL, you have to actually specify views/workbook name/view name. Otherwise, you'll get a menu of all the views that are available. So a couple things you can do. You can create logic in here where you name one of the dashboards or sheets in your workbook a certain name. So you could say start or whatever naming system you want, and you could call it out here and say if this view equals start, then display that one. That's a good way to pass back to your dashboard authors that in that workbook, that's going to be the one that's displayed first when it appears on the portal. For this example, we're just taking the first one. So we grab a list of all the views and put it into a data table, and then we're taking the first row with the first item, which is the view name. So for simplicity, we just take the very first one, and now we have all the information that we want about this workbook. So the last part that we do here is we stuff all this information into my workbook's new, the workbook ID, workbook name, all the way down to owner name and view name. So we've gone through and identified that this is a tagged workbook, and we've gotten all the information, but it's really been 3 different calls to the REST API. That's one big area where it's going to be improved in the future. You'll be able to specify with fields and say, I want workbooks, but I want these fields back from this call. So definitely something that makes our life a lot easier and will speed up the whole process enormously in the future. So now that we have our workbooks that have been tagged, these are the ones that we actually want to be able to display, we do a sort in this area. So we're sorting it by the project name. And the reason for that is when you saw the menu, we actually list out the project name and then the workbooks under that project. So when we do the logic, and we'll go through menu in just a second, we want to have it so that they're all organized in the same way. So we basically use this data table, we sort it, and we put it back into a sorted data table. So the last part of this function here is we create a JSON string of the workbook information that we just got. And the reason that we're doing that for this example is because we're saving it as a session variable. You can't take a data table and save that as a session variable. So for simplicity, we just serialize it as a JSON string and then save that string into the session. This is the area where you would, again, want to put this probably in a cache database, a database table or something on the portal layer so that each page is then hitting from that database table rather than pulling it from session. But the main point of why we're doing this is so that we're not hitting the REST API with every page load. If you're going menu and then a report view and back to menu and report view, we want one main call to Tableau server through the REST API, and that's when we logged in. So we serialize this, this data table and into a string here of my workbooks, and then the results that we're passing back, we add all these different variables that we got into that final call. So all of that happened in this one function, and this array list that you get back, my info, now has all the information about that user. So at a minimum, we've gotten back the first element, which is that login token. So even if it failed, the login failed, the username and password were not valid, we passed it in, it came back and said that we set that one variable to failed. So here, we're going to pop off the very first one, this login token, and now we're able to write our conditional logic that says, if this isn't failed, we want to save all these variables to sessions, including the My Workbooks, which is the JSON string that we created in that previous function. The else function here means that this we got back, it was a failed message. So we're going to redirect the user back to index, and we're going to post this error message, which is login not correct. Further down in the logic here, if they fall into this conditional step, then this means that they're already logged in. We've already set a user ID for them. They've already passed, and this is a valid session, so we're just going to continue on without doing anything. If they've failed both of those logic steps, we're going to strip out everything on this session, and we're going to send back, and most likely this was an expired session. So we know at that point that we're going to error handle, pass them back to index, and tell them why. There's another section in here that also is sort of a double check for that. And then you'll see at the very bottom of header, we're actually just designing or drawing out the HTML that's at the top of the page. So the header, we've now come really all the way down to this part here, and now we're moving into the menu page. So the menu page itself includes all of the files, the header file that we just went through, a footer file, which is really just HTML, so we're not even going to go through that part. And then it displays the top header, and it draws the menu, which is this black bar menu right here. So then it goes down into the page, and you'll see the featured workbooks area, and then you get the main part of this menu page, which is this menu here that's actually dynamically being drawn based on what was in that JSON that was in the session variable. So this function here, load menu, is coming from this menu.cs file, and we're here. So we'll walk through this one real quick to show what we're doing. The main function of this function is to just draw the HTML menu system. So we take that JSON string that we were passed in, that's in the session variable, and the user ID that we have for the person who's logged in. And the first thing we do in this function is we deserialize that JSON string, and we turn it back into a data table of My Workbooks. So that's session management. We've packed that whole list of workbooks with all that information into that JSON string. We pull it right back out into My Workbooks. So here, in the next step, we iterate through with this for each statement, and we go through each item in that My Workbooks, and we pull out the project name, which we're calling group name, the workbook ID, and the workbook name. And then the conditional logic here is really, it's two parts. So it's the if-else. If this is the previous group name, if the current group name equals the previous group name, then we're going to draw things differently. So here, we only want to draw this HTML line if this is a new project, a new group that we're getting to. If it's not, like this finance group, we just want to draw another row that displays the report option. So this bottom part here, if they didn't equal each other the first time we iterate through here, we're going to draw this HTML that has the group name, and that's the header part. When we get to the very bottom, here we go through and we draw the link. We're taking the report ID out, and we're building that link for this call here. And then we're doing the same thing down here for the view report option, which has the same link, and we're going to pass the report ID over to report view. At the bottom of this function, we're taking the current group name, and we're going to save it to this last group name variable. And then the next time that we iterate through, this condition is going to return true, because it's the same project name. We have the same Tableau samples project name, and we're not going to draw that header. So it's very similar logic here. We're still printing out a link and a button, but there's just no header. So that function will return this result string, and the result string is all the HTML that'll build the menu, and we just simply printed out on the screen. So that's how you're getting this main area here from that menu page. Again, this page is not calling the REST API again. You can load it 100 times. As long as that session is open, you control the session on your web server, it's going to be valid, and Tableau server is able to just produce its visualizations. So the last page that we're going to come here is the report display page. So now we've taken that ID, that link has been created, and we passed the report ID to the report view page. So the report view page is going to grab that report ID from the query string, and then it's going to, for the next step, it's going to create, we're using trusted tickets, so it's going to actually call out to Tableau server to create a session on the, between the browser and the Tableau server. So there's a difference. There's two separate sessions going on here. One is connecting behind the scenes to Tableau server's REST API, and the other one is connecting so that between the browser and the Tableau server so that there's actually a user session open. That's what allows us to actually display the visualization and put it in the browser here. So rather than getting a separate login that they come through, we use trusted tickets. In order to use trusted tickets, you have to go to Tableau server and actually add the IP address of the web server, the portal server, into a whitelist so that this one is accepted. And then once you do that, you'll be able to make a call to the Tableau server URL /trusted, and you just pass the username to it, and it will give you back a ticket. If that fails, and that user doesn't have access, the ticket will return a -1. And we don't have any, in this example, we don't have any error handling here. We don't have a, if I get -1, then throw this error message. Because we've already hit the REST API, because the REST API told us this is a workbook that this user should have access to, we didn't think, there isn't really no reason to double check and error handle here. You should not ever be able to get here to this point without having a valid username. So it is, for this example, we took a simple case. There is the possibility that somebody could have had access turned off between the time that they logged in and the time that we get to this page. And in this sense, they would get an error message, but it would display on the screen as a -1. So you may want to error handle something there, but for simplicity on this one, we just move on. So the next function is we're building the report string. And so the report string is that actual URL, the /views /workbook name /view name. So in order to do that, we're going to pass that JSON string from the session. We're going to pass the trusted ticket that we have and a report ID. Because we're going to use the report ID to figure out all the information about the workbooks from this array. So we'll jump over real quick to the report string. And here we get the report ID, the trusted ticket, and the session JSON. So first thing we do is deserialize it just like we did in the menu page, build it back to a data table of my workbooks, and then we iterate through with this for each loop to get that information back out again. The project name, report ID, workbook name, and the default view. So this section here, we're doing a simple search and replace. If we find any white spaces in the view name, we're going to return them, basically remove them. So we get a default view. So if somebody actually puts spaces in the name, in the URL, you're going to call that without any spaces. Then the conditional logic down here says that as we're iterating through all the workbooks that I have in that JSON session variable, we only want the report ID that was sent to the URL as the identifier. So we only want that information. So if they match, then we're going to build out this URL. Now the URL is going to have first this /trusted because we just got a ticket from that mechanism. The server is on the IP address that's in the whitelist. We get back a ticket, and then that ticket has to be passed in the URL to Tableau server. So the URL that's built up is actually going to be Tableau server /trusted, the actual ticket that was returned. Then we get views, and then we take the workbook name, and we're displaying the default view that we built, which is the first option in that workbook. So then at the end, we've built up this string. We're going to return that result back to here, and we have the report ID. So moving down, now we're getting to the part where it's really the JavaScript API, the embedding part. So since we're using the JavaScript API, we use a div tag to define where in the page we want this report to show up. So there's a div that's on this page that's right in this area, and that's where we want it to show up, and we're setting what the height and the width is going to be. We identify this div as viz display, and then we jump into JavaScript and actually start building this out. So our function here, load tab viz, is going to take a URL, and then the first thing we do is we look to see if there's a Tableau viz handle, which we're going to create in just a second. If one already exists, we want to dispose of it just to make sure that there's nothing memory-wise, there's nothing that's previously existed that's, that has the same handle. So then the first thing we do is get a variable called visDiv by getting that viz display div that we just placed on the page. So that's giving us a handle of visDiv. Then we move down and we're actually building out the options for what we want the Tableau embedding to have. So the options that we're setting, we're telling Tableau that we want the width and the height to be set the same as what we've set that div tag to. So the width and height that we defined in that HTML for the div, we're using that same height and width here to define that. We're telling it that we don't want it to hide tabs. We could hide the tabs. If you publish the workbook with show tabs, you can have them displayed, or you can turn them off right here in the JavaScript API so that you get a real clean experience. Some people will build the tabs into the HTML layer. Some people will just use Tableau's native tabs to actually have those come out. So the next part is hiding the toolbar, and we turn that on because we don't want the Tableau toolbar with the share and everything else that's there by default. And then we have this onFirstInteractive function. This is an important area, even though we're not using it for any significance in this example. This is a really important area because this function gets fired after the viz has completely rendered and is visible to the end user. So when you load a page, like we have on this one, you'll see this export button on here. So this is just one use case, but many times when this page is actually loading and this viz is coming up, people don't want that toolbar, that export button, to be up there until the viz has actually loaded. So anything that you put in this function does not get fired until this viz is actually displayed for the end user. So a simple use case here would be that we could have our CSS that hides that export button, and then when we reload, or when we load the page and the viz is actually visible, this function would be fired, and then we would turn that from hidden to displayed. So then it makes a clean experience. It'll make your toolbar look like it's a part of the viz. But this function is one of the most used functions. So onFirstInteractive gets fired as soon as the viz loads. So the last part here that we have is actually creating this Tableau viz handle by calling Tableau viz, .viz, and we pass the div, we're passing the URL, and the viz options that we just set above. So I'm going to skip down here to the bottom where we create this first viz string. And we've got the Tableau server URL that we're getting from our session variables. We're getting the report URL that we built on the top with that function, and we're constructing a full URL. We have the variable of refresh set here, and we see that a lot from people in the field because it forces Tableau server to not use the cached information for a viz, but to re-hit back to the data source to actually reload the data. Many times on portals, if you're going page to page, back and forth, sometimes information has changed back in the database, and the viz loads. You expect to see the new information, especially if you have a form on the page and you've just posted a comment, and that's going back to the database, and then you want the viz to actually pull that again. This refresh tag is something that we use all the time, and many times we just put it on by default. So it bypasses Tableau server's caching, but it's with a portal. Many times that's exactly what people want. So the last thing we do here is we take that full URL and we post it into this load tab viz, which is the function that we ran right up above. So now, once this is called, this viz is now displayed on the screen. So the last thing I'm going to show is this export button. So clicking this export button here is going to fire this function, export to PDF. And since we built this Tableau viz handle up above, we're now able to call that Tableau Viz handle and simply say show export PDF dialog. So that's all the code that's needed to make this happen here, to build my button that displays this. And then I can just click download, and I'm using the standard components that are in the Viz. So that is the end of this example. We've gone through the three main components. We've gone through the three main components: the index page with all the authentication, stuffing everything into the session variables, the greeting page, which is really the main page of discovery and selection of workbooks, and then the report display page, which is the one that actually has the interactivity and the displaying of the report itself. So that, in a nutshell, is a basic portal. Those are the main components that we build. There's a lot of things that you can build off of this. I see a lot of people that build data capture things, forms that are right next to the Viz, so I can look at this and comment on something and hit a button, and that saves back to a database. The portal and the possible use cases of what you can expand here are really infinite, but this is the basic elements that you need to be able to create the portal. So a couple resources. All this code is available on GitHub. We have the release there, and you can fork off builds from there. Then we also have this link for this blog article that was written by the Tableau team. So internal at Tableau, as Jared showed you, we have a lot of workbooks. We use our own products. And so with 20,000 workbooks for just the development team, not to mention sales and everybody else that's there, we created a thing called My Tableau. And this blog article goes through and tells you all of the kind of best practices that they found while they were building the portal for our internal team. So we have a lot of examples on there, a lot of good just best practices and lessons that they learned along the way. So I highly recommend checking out that. It's a three-part blog post, but it's got a lot of great information. So last couple slides here. We have a couple related sessions here that are going on. I think the last two are still going on today. Definitely something that's very complementary to the topics that we're doing that you guys might want to check out. So the last part, we'll take some questions. And before I think we take first questions, if you have the app, please give us feedback. If you can post in the comments, we're really interested in things like what languages you guys are using. So if you wouldn't mind posting a comment in there just to kind of tell us what you're using, it'll help us drive selections and stuff, and we report back to the development team to tell them, what should they put effort on. So we have a Python-based server client library right now for the REST API, and so hopefully we can kind of get a good read of what people are using, so we can build other ones, C#, .NET, other things as well. So.
Okay, questions now.
Thank you.
So you had a question. Yes.
Perfect. Any issues doing this with Tableau Online?
So you can call the REST API on Tableau Online as well. It should be basically identical. There are a few things that you can't do on Tableau Online.
On Tableau servers or
Sorry?
whitelisting on your server for us? Is that
The trusted ticket
Trusted
side,
tickets would be a problem.
that's a restriction on Tableau Online, so you would have to use SAML to authentication or something else of that nature. In the future, they're moving in that direction to take all of the items that you can do with tab command and tab admin will be web-based, but there's no real ETA on when those will come out. That's the direction we're moving. So,
Over here.
It looked like I saw it, but with the trusted ticket, it's using the user, right? So even though it's pulling up, it's still using whoever logged in.
yeah.
So okay, I just want to make sure because I have a lot of ones where it's like who you are, so it decides what you see.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's exactly, you're doing that. You're just passing the username actually as a get variable in this query string to Tableau.
Okay, and will this work? So we've already set up single sign-on into our Tableau server.
Yep.
So that will still work the same?
Yeah, it's transparent at that point. The session is based on the browser, so that makes it even easier. Yep.
Up here.
So I saw the portal, the Viz redundancy or write back functionality to the database from the Viz?
From the Viz, the Viz itself is not designed as a form field. There are ways to do it. There's some hacks that you can put in there, like you can build a parameter, for example, and then you can have a button in the Viz and then use an action filter to actually fire that off to a web service that would capture that.
It's
But-
not something we recommend, but people do use URL actions or something to post to a
Because
form.
this JavaScript API, I can always have an action, I can
Yep.
have a text
Yep.
field, and I know it's not supported, but because I'm building a portal,
If you're doing something through the JavaScript API, you can have clicking on something in the Viz trigger an event listener, and you can just wait for it. And when the event listener fires, then you can have all the logic for submitting to a form external, and that would be a great way to do it.
Right. The JavaScript layer is really where you want to build that interactivity, and then that gives you really full control. At that point, you're using the Tableau Viz to identify certain elements. If I click on a mark, or if I do stuff, and then that can be passed to a hidden form field variable, and then I can type in a note or something like that and hit submit. But the form post part is much better to do in the HTML layer because you can use the standard HTML forms, which is easier, and you still have to do the logic to post it back to the database. So you have to handle that either way. So.
In the back there.
Is there any way to more dynamically make the height width of your sort of frame adjust so that people are publishing different sizes? It's a lot easier to kind of.
Yes, you can, but and I see that more applied in a mobile experience, like if people are using Bootstrap to give you different sizes. And I think that Tableau's newer features like the device control, to be able to have the mobile devices that are laid out, crushing and moving and resizing vizzes in different areas it doesn't kind of play really nice in the end. So I see more people building the device-specific dashboards that the layout's different.
So the easy, sorry.
You can do that, but when I think of a portal, I'm really thinking about a defined canvas area that it's a framework that's there, and then you're telling the authors, this is the framework that you have to work within. I do see people do 100% widths on screens, but again, it's dependent upon the size of the screen that the person's viewing it on.
So I think you were asking specifically about if you set the div to this, can I make the viz resize too? Is that true?
Maybe, so I think of some authors are publishing the Tableau server, but maybe one of them is doing a height of 1100, another's 1500, and that really works fine. It's fine. And I want that to be sort of automated through my portal. I don't want to have to manually set it for the 20,000 views that are published.
Yeah.
I just want to grab that.
So from the REST API, there's no way to really say what size is this workbook.
Yeah, not that I know of.
So it's hard. I think it's probably better to define, especially because it has an effect on the elements of the portal, the menu, the other parts. I would say that you'd probably want to find the maximum width and height that your people are building, design your portal for that, and then have the other ones that just kind of take less space in that area. But because it has an effect on the UI and the UX and the design aspects of the portal, you kind of you're locked in there a little bit. You want to make sure that you cater to them first.
I did a bit just if there are filters loaded, then resize the div to the size of the visualization.
Yeah.
At that moment, size.
Yeah, and again, I see stretching of vizzes is kind of dangerous in a sense, because I mean, I could have a bar charts that are together, and if it was designed to be big, and if I crush it, all of a sudden there are these little tiny little bars. So that's where device-specific dashboards are great, because you can go in there and say, if it gets too narrow, then break this into 2 different parts, or make it a different chart. And that's a feature in 10 forward. I've really tried to move everybody that way for my customers.
You can use the JavaScript API to resize a viz, though. So I think if you wanted to do this the right way, you'd use device-specific dashboards. For anything that isn't a device-specific dashboard, you'd publish it with the automatic option. And then you just set your div width to fill a container. And then you can have a listener to resize the viz to match the div. Yeah, up here.
You can set them. So the authentication ticket on the trusted ticket side, they're usually good. I think by
they're
default,
good for 3 minutes for trusted tickets by default.
on the start. And I've seen people turn that down to 5 seconds because really the browser is, you're getting it, the web server's getting the ticket, it's putting the token into the HTML, and then the HTML should be passed right back immediately to the Tableau server. You don't want to leave enough time in there where somebody could theoretically view source, grab the ticket, go to another computer, and put that ticket in, because then they would open a session. So The hijack, I mean, the hijack that is defeated if you've got a lower number of seconds. And you can set that with tab admin.
But so kind of the lower you go with that timeout, what happens when the biz needs to make calls back to?
The timeout is only for the redemption of the ticket. So the ticket only needs to be redeemed one time. After that, you subsequently don't actually need to get another trusted ticket because you've opened up a browser session. So it's the same thing as going to the Tableau server and logging in with your username and password. It's as long as you continue to interact with a viz or interact with the server, that session's kept open. So the timeout begins from the time that the browser stops communicating with Tableau server, and then it'll kick you out at that point. So.
Why you pass the user ID with the ticket? Is it like the Tableau server has a ticket when generated like with the user ID as well?
At which part?
When we're getting a URL to get the viz, you pass the Tableau ticket and the user ID, right?
For the URL, no, you don't need to put the user ID in there. The ticket is locked to the user.
The ticket already has a user ID.
Right, so when you called the trusted tickets and you got back that ticket is only valid for that user. So that's, when you're redeeming it, it's opening a session for that user and it knows who that user is. So you don't need to pass any identifying information with it.
And you're whitelisting your web server with the Tableau server.
Right.
So somebody have access to my web server, it means my Tableau server is compromised at that point because they are whitelisted.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they have access to be able to open up a session, but you'd have bigger problems if they've already compromised your portal layer.
Yeah.
I think I saw a question back here.
The thing was like for us, like they won't permit for the whitelisting of the servers, I see then.
Yeah, so I see a lot of people like keep the portal server and Tableau server inside their firewall, and then use reverse proxies to allow access from outside the firewall. So that way you're basically whitelisting those reverse proxies. So you're only having one point of penetration from your DMZ. So those would be, if somebody's hacked into those reverse proxies, they could get access. But again, you're locking it down to 2 HTTP ports and to those machines only. So that's about as secure as you can get.
Can we put some certificates?
So this seems like something maybe you guys could talk about afterward. I know there are a lot of people with questions. Sorry about that. Could we get you in the back?
If a user wants to open 5 workbooks in 5 different tabs, will this system allow that rather than replacing the browser tab every time?
Yes, you can control how you want it to be. So if you wanted, I see some people, I've even seen an extreme example where there was 32 vizzes on one page, and they were tiny little charts. So when you logged into the portal, it spun them all up, and they opened 32 at one time. So you can control what you want. Or if you click on it, you can actually make it to pop a new tab. It's really HTML standards at that point, and it's what you target.
Question in the back over there.
The REST wrapper is we use from a company called Data Painters, and so they just wrapped it in C#, and it's got, I think, 54 functions that can do everything that the REST API, and it's compliant up to 9.3. It doesn't have some of the new 10.0 features in it, but from time to time they update it, and it makes it really easy. I mean, 3 lines of code, and you can get what you want. And
Is that like a generic REST wrapper or something created specifically for the REST API?
it's created specifically for Tableau. Yeah, I mean, it's basically duplicating the functions, but giving them to you on programming language rather than just a wide open REST call. Because a REST call, you have to create an envelope, a header, you've got to define your XML that's making the request, and then you get it back. And really, like publishing a workbook, you have to make sure that your line breaks are exactly right, that your carriage returns are done right, and so there's a lot of complexity to it. In the library, you just call publish workbook, tell it where the workbook is, and it does it. So highly recommend that.
Right here, go ahead.
We are using SAML authentication, and our parent application uses the same SAML authentication.
Yep.
And we are using a JavaScript API to embed the visual.
Yep.
So what happens is like user logs in first, and then we are trying to embed same like you build the portal, we build the portal. So we are trying to embed the visual, right? So for that, the JavaScript API need to have the session of the user. So it takes some time to get the session. If the user is trying, if you are trying to embed the visual immediately, what we get is you have to sign into the Tableau server. So that's because it's not still established the session with the Tableau server. Is there any way you
It
can
should.
find the API?
Yeah, we get the same thing.
So you get a login from the SAML side?
Login in the
Yeah.
embedded in the
Yeah.
iframe.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
you have to wait for 5 seconds, and then you'll get it.
Interesting.
That's
what
interesting.
we did actually.
I do know there's a couple settings with SAML and iframes where you can change some settings. There's some clickjack settings and things on Tableau
That's
servers.
Disabled actually.
Right,
So you
right.
want to disable.
So that's,
Exactly.
yeah.
That's the only thing is.
There's a
it's not
SAML with
really-
iframes setting as well.
Time to establish session with the server, Tableau server via JavaScript API.
That's,
So is there a way, like, I saw you doing that, getting the session information using the client server API,
Mhm.
but that needs a Tableau controller handler, right? So you need to log in first.
That's on the REST API side. That's not on the JavaScript API side. That's interesting. I'll give you my
Yeah.
card afterwards and we can talk about it. I'd like to see that use case where you get that. I can think of a couple ways just off the top of my head to get around that, but I'd take a look at why that's happening and why that delay is happening. It shouldn't. You should be able to, I mean, we've got a lot of customers on SAML that logs in right away. So we'll talk about it afterwards.
Right here in the center. Been very patient, thank you.
You guys said something about recommending having a database on the portal server
Yep.
as
Yes.
well. Could you elaborate on?
So where we took all that information and stuffed it into a session variable, that same call could be, database inserts. I'm inserting them to the database. So then each time, rather than going to the session works great for an example. If I was dealing with 1,000 workbooks on my portal, it gets harder to stuff that much session variable information. You'd have problems. So that's
Okay.
where we get into the caching database side. I think it's typical web application at that point.
Okay, I think we're basically out of time. We will answer your question at the end if you're okay with that.
Yep.
Please, again, fill out our survey. Thank you so much for coming.